Jayden, how you doing, man?
Hey, Eric, I'm doing good. How are you?
Welcome back. I'm doing well, thank you.
Yeah, you've been a busy man recently. Congratulations on your wins.
Thank you. Yeah, been pretty busy all the way down to South Africa and back, and we got lucky enough that the Team USA got the World Championship.
That's awesome.
So
bringing it home.
Bringing it home. Believe it or not, we had not won it in 21 years. So
wow,
this was a big win for us, for Team USA.
That's great.
So thank you. Man, I want to know about you. I mean, we talked about ballistics and statistics and group sizes and all that good stuff, but I want to know what makes you want to be a ballistician, right? Like, we all have aspirations as a kid, and I don't know anybody that's ever, as a kid, said, I want to be a ballistician. So how do you get here, man?
Well, I don't know if I knew I wanted to be that, but I think that was like maybe the natural path and ended up there anyway. So I grew up on a farm and ranch in southern Colorado, and we were kind of out in the middle of nowhere. It was, I think, 25 or 30 miles to the nearest town that had a mom and pop gas station. Like, it was the middle of nowhere, and then probably an hour to the nearest major town that would have, like, say, a Walmart and stores that you're kind of familiar with when a town gets to that size. So we were pretty far out there. Grew up working on the farm at a very young age. I think we started working on the farm at like 8 or 9 years old, and doing a lot of irrigation and checking cattle and stuff. You just spend a lot of time outside and on the land, and as a rancher or farmer, varmints can be troublesome, like prairie dogs. We did what was called dead level irrigation. So essentially you have a big ditch and there's a dam in it, and the water hits it, raises up, and goes out into the field instead of, say, like a sprinkler that's very common today. Because the area I grew up in was a high mountain desert, and so water was very sparse, and you don't want to lose it to evaporation, essentially. So if there was a bunch of prairie dogs that were in that field and dug a bunch of holes, you're going to lose a bunch of water down that hole that you can't afford to lose. So we were definitely encouraged to shoot prairie dogs, and then coyotes on the livestock side that can wreak some havoc. So from a very early age, grew up doing that kind of stuff. I had my two cousins. We were all kind of like brothers growing up on the farm, same age. And when I think we were 9 or 10, I guess that's the approved age that you can get your first, firearm, call it. You upgrade from the BB gun or pellet rifle. And my two cousins got 22 long rifles that year. And my dad was kind of a city guy. He lived up in Denver and wasn't really much of a hunter or shooter or anything like that. But he wanted to get me my first rifle. And so I told him, I wanted a 22 because ammo was cheap. And you could buy a brick of 500 or 550 rounds for $5 to $7 back then, So, so he buys me my first rifle and didn't know any different. Ended up getting me a 22 Magnum, which... you look at the cost of ammo for a 22 mag versus a 22 long rifle, and that's a different world. I was paying almost $10 for 50 shots, while my cousins, they could just spray and pray. They weren't really worried about it. So I say all that because that 22 Magnum forced me to be more efficient and pay attention to what I was doing and choose my shots because I was more limited on ammunition. And due to that, I started to observe things that maybe you wouldn't observe if you didn't have those limitations. If you have an infinite amount of ammo and you shoot and miss, you might not care to notice that you missed left and right. You just keep shooting, right? You might not need to, where I needed to pay attention to those things. And so I started to observe that bullet drop was a thing. I was a kid. Like, I don't know anything about physics and stuff like that. So I didn't know that bullets dropped due to gravity or that they deflected due to wind or any of that kind of stuff. So I started to observe those, call it ballistics phenomena, that were all so concentrated on to varying degrees, and observed them enough that I could become effective. I had learned to, hold at a certain point over a prairie dog, depending on how many like terraces he was away, or how far into a crop circle he was by the the tire tracks. You kind of use those as like range estimation tools, because I didn't have a rangefinder. I didn't have any of that, and so that really kind of started a fire, because I took what I observed when I missed, was able to make some corrections to it and become successful, and that just pushed me down the road to where I am now. That search for information to improve in my abilities, and it branched out from there. I had figured out how to take a second focal plane duplex scope. So when I first got the rifle from my dad, it didn't even have a scope on it, and it had no iron sights. And so for a while I was shooting it by sighting down the top of the barrel, which was, like horribly unsuccessful. Yeah. Might be okay on a jackrabbit at 10 feet, but that's about it. But once I got a scope on it, I figured out that, in the duplex, you have the fine part of the duplex and then kind of the fat posts, on your corners.
Right.
And I started to see that, like at certain ranges, I can use that fat post at the bottom to aim at the prairie dog, and I almost hit him, or I hit near him, Well, then I vaguely remember one day messing with the magnification and seeing that as I looked at whatever I was looking at, and I played with the magnification, that the gap between that crosshair and the fat post would change. And so I had sort of figured out like a poor man's BDC reticle. So I got to the point where I knew that our fields were big squares that had, they were kind of like a terrace, they got higher and higher as you went. And I knew, and they were all the same distance to each different field, or the width of each field was the same. And so I got to where I knew that like, if it's the second field, I need to put it on like 8 power, and then I can use the post. And if it's the third field, it's like 3.5 power, something along those lines.
Yeah.
And then I graduated into a mil dot. I saved up some money and bought a second focal plane mil dot, like a really cheap one. I don't remember if it was like a Tasco or something along those lines. But, when you're a kid, you can't afford much. And started to figure out, or not figure out, but by this time, internet is starting to come along, like dial-up, so that painful process, those of us that remember those days. Yeah, exactly. So I think on the internet is where I had found the mil ranging formulas, so you could range estimate using the mil dot stadia. And about that time, a very influential person in my life came along, who kind of became a mentor of mine and taught me a lot about shooting and a lot about hunting. And one Christmas, he asked me, hey, if you could have any rifle you wanted, what would it be? And, as a kid, I had it all spec'd out. I knew exactly what it was. I had been looking through the catalogs, and I told him I wanted a bull-barreled Remington 700 in 223, because I knew the cost of 223 ammunition was a little more affordable, than some of the more hot rod cartridges. And he, at that time, was also starting to teach me to reload, and we had reloaded some 223 ammunition. And so that Christmas, he got me that rifle, like to the T, the model I asked for. And so that really pushed my capabilities out, advancing from 22 Magnum to that. That started me into hunting coyotes a lot more heavily. So at that time, the bounty on coyotes was pretty decent, but there was also a fur trade that was pretty strong. And there was a guy I knew in town that knew a fur trader from Wyoming, and this guy would kind of travel around the western states, I guess, and stop in and buy furs for whatever he was doing with them. And so this guy told me, if you can get, a pretty good coyote, you're going to bring $50 to $70, depending on the quality of the coyote. Well, that's a lot of money for a kid that's now, say, middle school, high school age. So I really started focusing on coyote hunting, and that 223 was great for that. And that whole era just really advanced my abilities as far as distance goes with very limited tools. I mean, I was really at the mercy of back to what I originally said, observing a problem and then trying to sort it out and just retesting that problem over and over. And, oh yeah, it works. Well, this must be true because it works every time, was kind of the learning process there. So, I mean, that's the fire that started, that got me to where I was, or where I am now. I've never been satisfied with the fact that things just are. I want to know why and how they work. And so I was trying through all those years and to this day, I was trying to study ballistics and understand why I observed what I observed, but also why I could change what I did and be more effective. And so I consumed as much material as I could back then, which wasn't much. There wasn't a lot of books that explained ballistics very well. And the ones that were very complex. And I remember getting, there's a book, Modern Exterior Ballistics by Robert McCoy. Have you ever heard of that one?
No.
So Robert McCoy, I guess you could call him maybe like one of the grandfathers of our understanding of ballistics today. So he worked at what was then called the Ballistic Research Facility, or now is the Army Research Labs up at Aberdeen, the big military proving grounds where they did a lot of these ballistic studies and kind of defined things. And he has a book that he published, I don't remember how old that book is, maybe in the 80s or 90s. But it's full of math. Like he was a super smart guy and had done all this testing, and he would give you a basic explanation of kind of what he was talking about, and then all these formulas that defined it. And at that point, I figured out that I'm never going to. The easy answer is not out there. I'm not just going to be able to go read it. I'm going to have to sort through some of this math stuff and figure out what matters, in those different formulas to understand what's most important or what really doesn't matter or stuff like that. And so I kind of went through that just on my own piece by piece. Like if I didn't understand something, I would have to go break down, well, how does that piece of math work so that, break it down to where I could understand it and then come back into that full formula to get an appreciation for what information he was portraying. So that book was very influential to me. Spent some time in the military, had some very influential people there as well. I come from a family of writers, and so writing's pretty easy for me. And I had written some articles that pertained a little bit had a little bit of ballistic nature to them, but more for training and like capability and stuff. And they were pretty well received, and they got picked up by a couple that used to do fine stock making. It was the Dressels up in, I think, Washington. Long story short, they were connected with Precision Shooting Magazine, which I'm sure you're familiar with that publication when it was still in print. And they connected me with the editor, and I sent him some of my stuff, and he really liked it. And so I became, I guess, a published author for the first time, which was kind of cool, since my family has, a lot of that lineage. Some of those articles got picked up by Bill Gravatt, who I'm sure you know Bill.
Yep.
So at the time, Bill was the president of Sinclair International, so the precision reloading side of Brownells, and I had met Bill at a conference, and he had read that stuff and said, "Hey, I'd like to make a couple phone calls on your behalf." He called companies throughout the industry. One of them was Jason Hornady. He knew Jason very well. So I was planning on getting out of the service around this time. When I got out, I went around to different interviewed with a bunch of different companies, and kind of had job opportunities being presented to me. Hornady was my last stop, and that was kind of a crazy time because the people I was supposed to interview with here at Hornady were gone on a trip overseas. And so I had interviewed with all these other companies, and they had offered me positions, and they're saying, like, are you going to take the position or not? And I was like, well, I'd kind of like to get like this last, company in and really make a decision after I've interviewed with all of them. And so there's this pressure going on. And so I finally kept the other companies at bay and got out here and did my interview. And as soon as I did my interview, I knew this is where I wanted to be. So I hired on here in 2011, and I was working with Dave Emery. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his name. He's pretty well known within the industry. So I was hired to essentially work with Dave on a daily basis and essentially help him with all of the research and development that we were doing here at the time. Learned a tremendous amount from Dave. Couldn't put a number or a value on the amount of things that I learned from him and the knowledge that he had, especially at that time in his career. He had been in the industry for 30 plus years at that point, so he was extremely knowledgeable. And so worked with Dave for many years, and then he decided to retire, And so I took over his position, and here I sit today. So that would be a kind of truncated, quick run through of how I got here. And so that fire with ballistics is, when I was that kid with the 22 mag, did I know I wanted to be a ballistician one day? Absolutely not. I didn't even know that existed. But I think like so many of us, probably like you too, like we have this passion in this hobby, and we can't not do it. And then we end up finding ourselves in a position where maybe that's how we make our living. It's kind of cool.
Man, your story is awesome because I completely identify with it. So let me give you a quick rundown of how I ended up here.
Okay.
Ranching. Had to shoot coyotes.
Oh, yeah.
And my dad's favorite rifle was a 22 Magnum. He says, you don't need anything, because my dad used to hunt for meat, right? And he used to use his 22 Magnum because, low recoil, low noise, all that, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, but I used to tell him, Dad, you can't hunt, you can't hunt deer here with you got to have the centerfire. But the point is, grew up ranching, had to shoot coyotes, cattle. And I had friends, and they knew how to hand load and all that. So I said, teach me, I want to learn. And then I would ask them, how do people make these really long shots? And they're like, oh, well, they have really big guns. And that was their solution for, if you want to shoot farther, you need a bigger gun.
Yeah, of course.
And I thought, there's got to be more to it, because the military, I know they use 308s. How do they shoot a 308 that far? So that's kind of how I got into what I call the software side. They were all into hardware. And I'm like, you got to have software. Long story short, I started reading books and started understanding. And then I got my first sniper scope, and it was a Nikon with MO8 turrets and a milled-out reticle.
Oh, yeah. That sets the era right there. There was a period when that was the thing.
Yeah. And hindsight, it was the most frustrating thing, because that milled-out reticle was only accurate at one power setting, right? And the turrets were MOA. But anyway, I learned all how to dial it, how to range with the because I couldn't afford a rangefinder.
Yeah.
So I bought the scope, and I'm like, well, I can teach myself. And but I still did get I got a 264 Winchester Magnum, so I could get out there. And long story short, as the more I learned, I started backing away from the Magnums, and then I got into the 243, 223. So I kind of went the other way.
Yeah.
I listened to my friends that said you need a big gun, and once I started learning, I started getting smaller and smaller guns. But then
that's pretty cool. There's a lot of similarities there.
Well, then I got into hunting, big game and all that, and a friend of mine invited me elk hunting. So I went to Colorado. And I'm sitting there. By now, I have a rangefinder. I have the same scope. I have the same 264 Winchester Magnum. And I was the most read up of the bunch. I had practiced, 100, 200 yards with my little milled-out reticle. By now, I had a coyote. I had a kill at 350 yards. I was feeling pretty good.
Yeah.
And okay, 350 steps. I didn't have a rangefinder, so after I shot him,
it was
I just
probably
walked
way further then.
Yeah, so I just stepped it out, and I was like, that's about 350 yards. But the point is, they said, sit here. They saw a bull elk yesterday in that clearing over there across the canyon. If you see them, shoot them. Well, by then because I was going to Colorado, I spent money on a rangefinder. And so I'm sitting there, I range, and it's like 456 yards. And I'm like, I got this. I pull up my little chart, and I'm like, okay, I got to hold this many mils, right? And then I start to panic. I'm like, but I've never shot this far. And it's in the evening. So what if I wound the animal? Yeah. What am I going to do? And all of a sudden, I just start to panic. And now I'm hoping it doesn't show up, right?
Yeah.
So it never showed up, but I did promise myself that I was going to learn how to shoot. Like, this is not going to happen to me again. Came back home. I started looking around, and I found that locally they had a 500-yard F-class match every month.
Yeah.
I had no idea what F-class was. I just started showing up, and here I am.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
How long ago was that?
That
you found that F-class range?
Like 2007.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been a while now. But it all started with hunting coyotes.
Yeah.
Because it was a necessity, you know.
Mm-hmm. And
then
that
it became fun.
That seems to be a common thread, now that I'm in the industry and the guys that I work with here. I mean, Preston sitting behind the camera right now. It's the same story almost universally. We all grew up with a rifle in our hands to one extent or another, and it's like once you get bit by that, it never leaves you. You might go do other jobs in the meantime and branch off, but you always come back to that just being what keeps you going. That's pretty cool.
Well, that's what I did. When I was going to college, I was going to be a computer programmer.
Okay.
But then I needed a way to pay for college, so I started doing construction. I started a construction company. And then that got pretty big to the point that I had to leave school to go do construction. And then I did construction for over 20 years. Yeah. And, in 2020, 2021, I decided to retire from construction and do this. Because this is, again, I did construction just so I could do this.
Yeah.
Right?
It fueled it.
Well, what if I could figure out a way to, and again, I got to the point where I'm like, I can just retire from construction and I can just do this and we'll see where it goes. And trust me, I'm happy. Best decision I made in a very long time was to just do this full time, and I'm loving it.
That's the American
excited.
Story. That is really cool.
Yeah. And I get to talk to people like you, and many others, and people that back in the day I used to read about. Precision Shooting Magazine. I used to have the hunting magazines, and I had the books, and I would just read as much as I could. And again, I always called it the software side because again, I was into computers, and I'm like, yeah, you can have hardware, but you also need software.
You need the knowledge and capability.
Right, like anything else, right? You can get hardware, but if you don't have the software to go with it, it's useless.
Yeah.
And that's how, for some reason, that's how I always saw it. It's like, yeah, you can't just upgrade the hardware. You need to also upgrade the software.
That's right.
And somehow I made that connection early on, and I'm glad that I did because it's really helped me to this day.
Absolutely. That's really cool. And I'm sure you're still learning stuff to this day. I certainly am. I mean, technically my job is to kick over rocks and see what's under them ballistically.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, and that's why I like talking to people like you and many others. Like every time I talk to somebody, I pick up something. And I go watch my own podcast. And I've always said when the student is ready, the professor will appear.
Yeah.
And I can listen to the same podcast 6 different times over a period of time. And it seems like every time I pick up something different.
Isn't that cool? I love that.
There's an article called Secrets of the Houston Warehouse.
Oh, yeah. I've read that one. Absolutely.
And I read it once a year. I try to anyway. And
it's a reminder.
Well, it just seems like every time I'm like, whoa, I didn't see this before. And then I go explore that or whatever. But, for example, the one where you and I did, I was, again, I was coming at you from the competitor side where we know what we know, right? And
sure.
Obviously, statistics. I don't, right? Mm-hmm. However, I do have experience, and I know 5-shot groups is all we need. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I know your stuff, right? So sometimes I find myself in that predicament where I'm like, it's not that we disagreed. We didn't disagree in more shots is better because I know for a fact when we're shooting 15-shot matches, it's a lot easier to shoot a perfect score than when we're shooting 20-shot matches. Mm-hmm. So I already know you're right. However, in the load development thing, I just know that 5 shots, 3 shots, even 2 shots is all we need sometimes to get a understanding. So I started to think about that, and then I realized, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, the difference is we know what we're looking for. I don't know if you guys are actually looking for something. You're just looking for data. I have a specific thing that I'm looking for. So, for example, if the biggest I will accept is a quarter MOA rifle, if I shoot 2 shots or 3 and they're already half MOA, I abandon that because it ain't going to get any smaller.
Agree. Yeah, 100%.
So I go to the next thing and the next thing, and if it's not showing what I'm looking for, I don't waste time, right?
Sure.
So I think that's the difference. We have a different approach. I know what I'm looking for. If I'm not getting it, it's pointless to shoot 20 shots or 50 shots if 3 shots is already half MOA.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. Yep.
And I think that's where we disagree. We have a very specific thing that we're looking for. However, like I said, 20-shot matches is what we do. And I hardly ever take a rifle to a match without doing 2 or 3 at least 20-shot groups. You know, I don't call them groups. I just call them practice matches. Mm-hmm. But if it doesn't clean a target for 20 shots, it's pointless for me to take it to a match.
Sure. Yeah. And yeah, that's kind of what we were trying to put out. Whether we did it efficiently or not, I guess, is up for debate, you know. But that if you were to shoot just 3 and you got a super good result and you stopped there, like a small sample size can certainly tell you how bad something is, and it can certainly tell you how good something is. But if you continue to shoot, it might change. So, I mean, perfect example is what you just said. You know, I do my small sample size load development. If it's bad, I chuck it out. Like, there's no point in you wasting your effort and your time and your money and components and barrel life and all that to continue down pursuing something that's already bad. You know, absolutely. Get rid of that thing, and then once you find something that's good, you go out and you test it the way you're going to use it, right? 20 shots in a string at competition, well, I'm going to replicate that a couple times and make sure this thing's performing stable enough that I trust it to shoot a match with it. I 100% agree.
Again, once I realized that, I go, we actually agree. We just, I'm a little slow.
No, you're fine. I mean, it's the perspective that we're looking at things from. You know, we push the information out like, hey, we gathered all this information and this is what it showed. And you were coming in from a slightly different perspective of, well, I'm looking for a very narrow thing here, and some of that probably got clouded up. Like, no big deal. I mean,
and I think a lot of viewers also have the same. Again, they all have their own point of view, and you did say on that podcast, we can't control what people hear.
Right. Yeah.
that is,
yeah.
Well, that is
probably fortunately. I was going to say unfortunately, but I don't think we would want to control that.
But they heard it either way. It tends to happen that they get on one band or the other. You know, one side or the other. Mm-hmm. And I've had a few emails, people calling me an idiot, and I'm like, he goes, "You need to do it like them," and I'm like, "But I'm winning. Like, what do I need to do?" And they're like, "Well, you would win more." I'm like, "You don't understand how this works."
You've got a pretty good string going here of winning more. So,
thank you. And it's but the point is, they get on one band, on one camp or the other, and I go, I don't think that's how it works. It has to do with what you're looking for. You know, for example, I'll post a 5-shot group that's like tiny, and they're like, "Well, that's irrelevant. The Hornady guy said," and I'm like, "Okay, fine." And again, it's not irrelevant because it meets what I'm looking for.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I can continue down that path.
Yeah.
It's the minute it starts to blow up, you know, and I don't, you know, a friend of mine, we share groups all the time, right? That's what we do. And I do get don't look at that one. I pulled that one. And I'm like, no, I count everything. And he goes,
right.
well, I said, look, there's no because in competition, that will count.
Yeah, absolutely. Good
so
point.
whether you want to count it or not, or you pull, even if you pulled it, it still counts. So if you say you pulled it, now it is inconclusive. Shoot it again.
Right.
And see if it repeats, right?
Agreed.
But if you keep getting that so-called flyer, then
maybe it's not.
something's wrong. Yeah. But it is, and this is where the 2-shot groups, like I recommend for my tuners, like 2-shot groups, because 2 shots, again, if you have a setting and you shoot 2 shots and it's 1 MOA, more shots is not going to make it better.
Can't make it smaller.
Keep going.
Yep.
Keep going, and don't look at the one group. Look at the whole pattern. I said if it's trending too low and then it starts to trend too big, it is what it is. You know.
Yeah.
And then you can shoot more shots there.
Yeah, exactly. Test that low spot and make sure it stays low. You know, don't just take that one pass through and be like, "Oh, I found it. We're golden," and run off, because you're probably going to get bit.
Again, this is just a quick and dirty way to try to get you there as fast as possible, right? Because a lot of times we do this during competition. So this is just a little shortcut, and I mean, it's worked for me before, but I am also very experienced. I know, like, the groups, and it's hard for me to explain, but like somebody will send me a group and I go, that gun just doesn't shoot. Like, well, what should I do? I said, nothing. This group is all over the place. There's no pattern. I said, show me the ones next to it, and they're all just kind of everywhere. I said, something's wrong with the rifle, the barrel, something's wrong. There's it's not telling me anything. And then there's some rifles, which is the ones that I like. Even when they shoot bad, I can see kind of how they're trending.
They're trying, yeah.
And so anyway,
we see the same thing, Eric. I mean, that's why I say trying. That's one of the terms we use. Like, this thing's trying. Or the bullets are trying to eat themselves. Like when you get a barrel where the bullets want to eat themselves, meaning that they're all trying to go to the exact same spot. Yeah, you can certainly see those trends in looking at groups. Yeah.
So when you guys do testing, what is it that you guys look for?
So the first thing we try to define is, what is the job? So kind of what you opened that earlier statement with, you define what your threshold is. Say, you said quarter minute. That's your threshold. Anything above that, you're going to pitch out. You're only going to pursue things below that. We do the exact same thing, but it depends on the job. What is the job of this? Because in my job, I have to exist in many different realms. This is a precision realm that your podcast and the work you do and the competitions you do is based around. I certainly do that. However, I branch into a bunch of different areas. Like, as a ballistician, everything from, a 350 Legend hunting load for a straight wall hunting state, all the way up to over to shotgun, handgun, and the complete span of rifle cartridges. From the tiny varmint stuff all the way up to dangerous game stuff. I touch all of those categories. And so that said, the processing is really the same in all of them. What is the job to do? Well, in the dangerous game area, the job is to be able to kill a Cape buffalo or the big five, right, in Africa. Well, there's certain criteria that you need to meet to be able to successfully do that job. Same thing as in the precision world. We define a threshold level of dispersion, and we say it has to meet or be below this level for me to have success, to be able to do the job I want to do. So really, that's the first step, is defining what is the job we're trying to do, and then assembling components. So it depends. Are we designing something from the ground up? Let's say, the 7 PRC cartridge that we just released. That was designed from the ground up. Well, the goal there was there's certainly a hole in the legacy 7mm cartridges that are available. Most of them are limited in their design by dimension or twist rate or something along those lines. So the first thing was to say, okay, we want a 7mm Magnum cartridge that is not limited by its design, meaning we can use everything that's available today. So say, we're making 190 grain 7mm bullets today. Those weren't made in the 1960s and 70s, like in the 7 mag time frame stuff. So we start out with saying, okay, we have all these tools at our disposal. Let's pick the components that will do the job that we want to do, and then feed those components with other components that will support them doing that job. So cartridge case chamber design that supports that bullet going as fast as that bullet needs to go to do the job at whatever range it's supposed to do. Feeding it with propellants that support that same end goal, right? Consistency of muzzle velocity, dispersion, temperature sensitivity, case fill for positional shooting, or uphill, downhill type stuff. All of that stuff has to be in a funnel of alignment towards whatever you defined that job would be. And I'm sure you're doing the exact same thing. It's just that of the span of things that I'm working on, from handgun, shotgun, rifle, that giant span of stuff, you're just in a narrower span of it. You're in the precision rifle sliver, but you're doing the same things. You're picking a bullet that'll do the job. You're not picking a legacy hunting spire point bullet to shoot your 1,000-yard F-class matches. Why? Well, because it doesn't do the job as good as these other ones over here, right? So same kind of concept. Yeah.
The more I do this, the the less I do to the ammunition. It's people think, oh man, at your level, you guys must do all kinds of crazy things. I'm like, no, we actually, I used to do a lot more when I didn't know what I know now. I mean, I used to do, oh man, I would spend so much time on this ammunition. And as time goes on and the more I learn, the more I realize what really matters. And I focus on that. And then I just ignore everything else. Don Nagel used to say, they asked him, they said, he was a very high level shooter. I said, well, what do you do to your ammunition to reload? He said, I do about 20 different steps. And they're like, wow, that's a lot. He goes, well, I do realize I only need 10. The problem is I don't know which 10. So as I have went on, I've realized which 10, and then those 10 turn into 5 and things of that nature, right? So there's a lot, kind of like what you guys have found, that we no longer do. And I say we because, like, I'll find out something and I'll share with my group of friends, and then they'll try it and they go, yeah, that doesn't matter. And then they'll find something else. So we're actually looking to minimize how much we do. However, it doesn't affect the results. Right. If anything, they get better because I think now we can spend more time actually shooting.
Yeah,
right?
you can focus your time and effort on the things that actually have a measurable impact on the outcome.
Yeah, and the other thing is we have defined the components, right? Well, this is the bullet. And new bullets come out pretty regularly, and people always ask me, hey, well, have you tried this bullet or that bullet? I'm like, nope. I just tried the same old 180 grain burger. It works. So I just use that. And they go, well, now they make a 190, or, Hornady has the 8 tips. And I'm like, nope, I don't change. Just because change means a lot of work to me.
Because you can't just start back over and
everything.
Revalidate all that. Yeah. You made a point to that on that last podcast where I think you said, well, doesn't my experience count for something? And I said, yeah, like that counts for sample size. You've tested this same set of things so many times that you can quickly see a trend that's out of the normal. And when you go swapping stuff around, you can't do that because you're starting from scratch. I suffer from that all the time. When I go shoot matches, the guys here give me a hard time because I'm always messing with something. I'm always testing something new because for me, that's a perfect opportunity to see what does it do in reality when you take this thing to a match. And so, I mean, there's been times when I've shot 3 different bullets and loads in the same match, and I'm swapping stuff around depending on, what the stage is or whatever is going on. And when I do that, I certainly don't perform as well as when I compete with that same rifle that's shooting the same load that I've shot for 2 or 3 years. I do better. And my skill level hasn't changed dramatically from those 2 different examples. So I would definitely agree with you there.
I do personally have what I would call the play around year. And I learned that from Speedy. Obviously, leading up to World Championship, it's not a good time to start playing around with different things, right? You just pick what works and then stick to it and just work on yourself, right? Your skills, your abilities. But now that we kind of got past the World Championship, I have some things that I'm gonna play around with because number one, I have the time, and number two, if I don't do well in matches, it doesn't matter. I mean, I know they all matter, but at some point you have to improve, right? And you have to suck to improve. Like, you have to be willing to take a beating in the search for new knowledge, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But you said, well, I don't perform as well at matches. Well, that was not your intention. Your intention was to learn something,
right? Yeah.
And either you win or you learn, right? And that's how I look at it. Oftentimes, I'll go to matches, same thing. Bring 2 different rifles, or even 1 rifle with 3 different loads, and just, that's part of the large sample testing, right? Just go to a match and try in a full match environment and see how they do.
Right.
For South Africa, we had to ship the ammo like 6 months in advance. So that gets fun because you have to save that barrel, save the components. And what I did was I sent 500 and I kept back enough ammo. And I didn't shoot that barrel for 5 months. Then a month leading up to it, I took some of that ammo that I had sent over, and I reseated the bullets. I sent them long, pushed the bullets down to the seating depth that I was looking, that I wanted. And I practiced with it just to make sure everything was good, so that when I got down to South Africa, literally I'm dealing with the same ammo.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. That's
so
smart.
The only thing I had to deal with down there was, different elevation, different temperature, all those things. But it didn't take much. During practice, I turned the tuner a few times, got it shooting good, and off to the races I went. But again, this is back to the experience, right? I'm like, I'm going to keep some ammo back of the exact same stuff. I'm going to let it age here, and then I'll shoot it so that it's the same. So the point is, my preparation for tuning that rifle in South Africa started here like a month before. But yeah, it's not, I was just worried that it would change because of it being aging for that long, but it was fine.
Yeah. You don't know until you test it. I mean, that's my whole job. That's what I do for a profession is trying to make sure that, what I do here isn't going to change by the time somebody uses it out there. That's a really important aspect of it.
You talked about that 7 PRC. That's a pretty hot cartridge right now.
It's been very popular.
You guys kind of ruined our thing because we were calling it 7 PRC. We'd take the 6.5 PRC and neck it up to 7mm.
Yeah.
And we've been doing that for a while now in F class. And by the way, that's what I won with.
It is. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's what I won Southwest Nationals with. Down in South Africa, I took my 284 Shehane and a 7 PRC W. Now we're having to call it the W for Alex Wheeler. The W's Wheeler. We used to call it the 7 PRC because there was no 7 PRC. But
then we ruined that part.
Now you guys ruined it. So now we had to change the name. But tell me let's talk about that, because that also interests me, about how you decide, hey, there's not enough 7mm out there. Let's do another one. Yeah. And if so, how do you decide? A lot of people, they said, well, it's going to be, we all thought, well, it's just going to be the 6.5 necked up, right? And people were saying, no, it's just going to be the 300 neck down. And you guys went somewhere in the middle. Rumor has it that you guys made it that size just so it can clean up a 7 Remington Magnum chamber if somebody wanted it. So, again, I'll just ask you, how did that come about?
Well, one of the things that so why another 7mm might be where to start that. I think the reason you've seen us go down that road is because of what happened with the 6.5 Creedmoor in the early 2000s. Did we really need another 6.5? The 260 Remington had existed for 10 years up to that point. And that's a pretty good cartridge. It does a lot of stuff. There's some stuff it leaves on the table. The spec twist rate is a 9 twist, so it limits you there. You can't shoot the modern heavies out of that spec rifle. And the chamber, the chamber design is a little bit limiting there. But in general, I mean, it's 80% of what, say, the Creedmoor is. So what justifies introducing a new cartridge and going to all that trouble and gun guys having to build new guns and all this stuff for that 20% bit more performance, or capability, the ability to use more bullets, all that kind of stuff? Well, what we saw was that even though that's, say, 20, and I'm just hanging random numbers on, right? Just say it's 20% better. That amount of 20%'s contribution to your capabilities was more than 20%. If you take a spec 260 Remington that's going to have to run, essentially a 130 class or lower bullet because of the 9 twist requirements at cold sea level conditions for gyroscopic stability, you run that against a Creedmoor with a 140 or a 147 or something, and it stomps it, right? So that little bit of design change made a massive impact on the end performance. Well, that really lit a fire where we started to recognize that most of the cartridges that exist out there came from an era where the components we have available today, mainly projectiles, some new propellants, can't be used there. You can't use these modern day. What what 7mm bullets were you shooting this year? Like when you were in South Africa, what projectile were you shooting?
180 grain hybrid.
Yeah, 180 grain Berger hybrid. You can't shoot that bullet out of a spec 7mm Magnum and get it to work well. You can't feed it in the factory mag, likely. There's a whole bunch of limitations there. And so the 6.5 Creedmoor really spurred that for us. And you saw from 6.5 Creedmoor, you have a whole lineage of cartridges, through the PRC line and the ARC line and the Creedmoor line, 6 Creed and all that stuff. So where does the 7 fit in, being that there's all these new cartridges? Well, it fits in that exact example. The 300 PRC fixed all of the 30 cal Magnum issues. So 300 Win Mag is limited in a whole bunch of ways, right? You can't use a whole lot of bullets in it. You can't get them to fit in a magazine and feed. You have the 300 Rum, which is more of a modern day one that came out in the 90s. But the 300 Rum, you can't use a lot of bullets in it at a mag length. There's still all these limitations that exist. Even the 30 Nosler introduced in the 2010s is the same thing. So what did the 300 PRC do when there's all these other 30 cal Magnums? It allowed you a limitless design. You can use any 30 cal bullet that's manufactured. You have a whole class of propellants that you can use with it. That limitless thing is very important. You saw the same thing with 6.5 PRC. So why 7? Because there was a big hole in the 7mm market. Now you can customize and do that stuff all day long, right? Like you could you're shooting custom cartridges. You're shooting some Wildcats for your competition stuff. But part of our business is supporting the guy that doesn't have the either resources or ability to go do that. He might not make enough money to go have a custom rifle built or one rebarreled or something, and his only option is to pick an off-the-shelf solution. And so one of our goals is to bring, because in the Wildcat world, you have limitless performance, right? You can do anything you want. You can spec the throat for whatever length bullet you want to shoot and get the correct twist rate, and you can build that so that it works for what you want. But a lot of times the average guy can't do that. He's limited by, hey, I only have enough resources to go purchase a finished product and use it. And so one of the goals of those cartridges, because of what we saw happen with the 6.5 Creedmoor, because you kind of reverting back to that, you could take a 260 Remington and go customize it and Wildcat it and get it to do the same thing a 6.5 Creedmoor will. You could throw the 260 out. You could put an 8-twist barrel on it. You could do all kinds of things to essentially turn that into a Creedmoor. But the limitation is all that work and money involved in doing it. So the 7 PRC is the same thing. It's a modern 7mm Magnum that's limitless for everybody. You don't have to be a Wildcatter to get that performance benefit from it. Now, why the cartridge case design or chamber design, like you're saying? Why didn't we neck down a 30 or neck up a 7? Because in the world of internal ballistics, when you take a parent cartridge case and you neck it up or neck it down, generally what that does is pushes you up or down in a burn rate, speed of propellant. Because one of the main drivers of the way that propellant burns is the volume that it's burning within. Now that's a dynamic deal. In the beginning, it's static because the bullet is sitting in the case. It's not moving, and you have a fixed volume underneath the bullet in the case. That's like step one. As soon as there's enough pressure built within that case that the bullet starts to move forward, now that volume is changing, right? It's getting greater. As that volume changes, the pressure changes. As the pressure changes, the burn rate changes. The way powder burns is kind of like a 3-legged stool, and one of the legs is pressure. So the higher the pressure, the faster it burns. It's more of like a exponential type behavior. And so if we simply took a 300 PRC and neck it down to 7mm, what we've done is once that bullet starts to move, the amount of volume increase behind the bullet will be less rapid than it would be with a 30 cal, because a 30 cal is bigger, right? There's more volume in the bore of a 30 cal. So if you simply took a 300 PRC and necked it down to 7 and fed it the same powder at the same charge weights, it'll be over pressure. Because of that reduction down to 7mm decreases the volume. So to deal with that, you have to back your charge weight off, right, to lower your pressures down. When you back your charge weight off, now you're not filling the cartridge case up, and you have issues with muzzle velocity consistency, and when you shoot uphill and downhill, you get different performance, right? Generally, when you shoot downhill, velocity drops, it's slower, and when you shoot uphill, it goes up. And then you have a whole variance of situations in between there.
The reason for that is because the powder moves away from the primer, or it's against the primer.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Right. I just want to make that clear that people don't think it has to do just with the angle in which you shoot.
Yeah, it's not gravity like making,
All right. Yeah, I just wanted to clear that up.
Good point. And so if we if we go the other way with it, so that was the issue of taking 300 and necking it down. The problem would be that you would have to drop charge weights down, and now you have a case that's too big for the propellants that you're trying to put in there. You could try to go to the next slower speed powder so that you can fill the case back up, but generally the iterations in powder burn rate speeds are not fine enough that you can fill that cartridge case up and maintain the velocity. Generally what happens is the jump to the next slower burn rate powder means, yes, I will fill the case up, but now I've sacrificed velocity to do it. So now I might be sacrificing 75, 100 foot per second just to have the full case and not have that positional shooting velocity variability. Well, is that trade-off worth it? I don't know. So you go to the other side of the spectrum. Why didn't we take a 6.5 and neck it up? Same circumstance. When we go from 6.5 to 7 and we neck that up, now we need a faster burning powder. And that puts you in kind of an odd middle ground. Now, like you said, you've been doing that for a long time with that cartridge, and it has obviously worked well with you. You've won with it. The important distinction is that in the Wildcat world, you don't necessarily have to adhere to a certain pressure level, right? As long as that's up to you. You get to determine what you're willing to deal with. And most people, it's as long as I can get the bolt open and my brass life is satisfactory long. Some people want 3 reloads, some want 20. As long as it's supporting whatever number you pick there, and the gun doesn't blow up, you're kind of happy. We have to live in a different realm, because when we make a box of factory ammo, it has to work in the absolute worst case condition out there. So of all the firearms manufacturers, there's tolerances that exist within the chamber, there's tolerances that exist within the bore and groove dimensions, and all of that gambit, right? And so when we build a cartridge, it has to work in the lowest common denominator from a safety standpoint. So the tightest chamber, the tightest bore and groove dimensions, that's what's used to assess the minimum, it has to be okay here. What it does in bigger chambers or bigger bore and groove dimensions or whatever it may be is only going to lower the pressure. So from a safety standpoint, that's okay. And so when we design those cartridges, that's why the 7 is, you see, it's very similar to the 300, but you see that the shoulder has been moved back. The reason for that is to take up that excessive capacity that was present in, say, the 300 PRC case when we necked it down to 7, reduced the bore diameter, had to drop our charge weights. We dropped our charge weights, and then we just moved the shoulder back to fit it.
Will it clean up a Remington Magnum chamber?
I don't know off the top of my head. I would have to look at that. I don't believe it will.
I heard that, and I never even looked into it. It's pretty easy to figure out.
Some info we put out is that, hey, from a cartridge overall length standpoint, it's the same. So if you have an old 7 mag and you want to have it rebarreled, the action magazine configuration will work with the 7 PRC, but yes, you would have to have a new barrel.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be kind of pointless to run a PRC in a because now you have the same twist limitations, right?
Exactly.
You just and I don't ever recommend rechambering like some.
Yeah,
because
got him.
Because it's again, you're just not getting the full. The full output potential, just because you're limited by twist rate, right?
Right. Yeah, you're back into those same problems that we tried to avoid with the introduction.
Which is so. If I understand correctly, the reason for the advancement in the cartridge design is because there's advancement in bullet design, right? Mm-hmm. And the bullets are outpacing the cartridges, and not really the cartridge, but the configuration, the factory available configuration. Mm-hmm. It's really what killed the 264 Win Mag and the 243, or the 6mm, right? The 6mm, I think it was spec'd with a 10 twist barrel. Mm-hmm. And 264, I think it was similar situation where you couldn't shoot. You had a hot rod that couldn't shoot the heavy bullets, right?
Right.
And back in the day, it was all about speed.
Yep.
Speed. And now we're transitioning into, and again, thanks to the work that you guys do, hey. Actually, heavier bullets do better at long range than really light, fast ones. Mm-hmm. Yep. And so that's kind of the advancement in cartridge design is, hey, we need faster twist rates.
Right.
Don't shove the bullet so far down into the case.
Yep.
Make the case shorter. This, that, and the other. So very interesting. Now, another one that I find very interesting is the arc. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm in the precision shooting world, right? Mm-hmm. So first was the 220 Russian, mm-hmm. and then they turned that into the 6 PPC, which is still dominates bench rest. Short range bench rest. Like that's the cartridge,
right?
And then Arnie Brennan, who was a bench rest shooter, started playing around with it, and he necked it up to 6.5, changed the shoulder angle, and then he got with Mr. Alexander, and they released what they call the 6.5 Grendel. Okay, and then I actually made a joke on Facebook one time, and I said, I think if you took the 6.5 Grendel, necked it down 6 millimeter, changed the shoulder angle a little bit, I think it'd do pretty good in, short range bench rest.
You weren't wrong.
It was amazing how many people said I was wrong.
Yeah, they had no idea the lineage before that. That's exactly what it was.
So, but then you guys took that and necked it down to 6 millimeter again, made a little change. And isn't that what the 6 arc is?
Yeah, so the 6 arc is
like a PPC ish.
Very very similar. So it's essentially the Grendel neck down and the shoulder moved back. And the purpose for that was, exactly like you said, like the PPC has a reputation for shooting very good dispersion and being a forgiving cartridge for barrel life and loadability. It's just the reason that cartridge, which has been shot for how many decades now, has been the king of that short range game, and still is today with all the new stuff we have to mess with, and try to find something better. It's still there, so there's something there that's very good. The Grendel cartridges, exactly like you said, come out of that lineage of the PPC. The 6.5 Grendel was introduced, over, and has it been 15 years plus now?
I met Arnie Brennan back in 2007, and he was shooting F-class matches with it just to see how it would do.
Right.
And that's when I first heard about it. He's from Houston. And I don't know if at the time it already was out or not, but so I'm going to say 15-ish years. Yeah, that's pretty accurate.
Yeah. So that cartridge is awesome. When there's the bench rest application for it, but when it was brought out and standardized with Sammy as the 6.5 Grendel, again, that brought it to every man essentially, right? And it was found that, hey, this thing performs pretty well in an AR-15 and has a lot of advantages over 5.56. The original design purpose of the 6 arc was for the needs of some groups within the Department of Defense. And so essentially what had happened was, of us Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, what we started to see was, in the early days, the people that you're fighting continue to fight you and they get smarter. And so in let's say the late 2000s through the early teen years of the 2000s, you saw that the enemy got smart enough that they knew that they could hang out at 500 or 600 meters or further, and the 5.56s from the M4s or any of those variants really weren't that effective there. And so we naturally shift our equipment to be more effective. So you see a shift to 7.62 to 308 because it's definitely capable out that far. But the trade-off of it is that it's heavier. The weapon systems are larger and more cumbersome, so you don't have as much flexibility, to be able to take. The system that's going to take that 500 or 600 yard shot is not the optimum system to go clear a house with, right? It's just too big. You can do it, but it's not optimum. The 6 arc came out from working with a unit within Department of Defense, and essentially the conversation started of, knowing what you know now in the professional capacity that I'm in. If you could carry anything you wanted on this sort of an op, right? You got a couple kilometer infiltration, so you're walking in. You may need to be able to take engagements, out to 500, 600, 700 on your way in, and then you have to say assault a compound and then get back out. What would you carry if that was just the basic mission set? And the answer at that point in time was, well, a 6.5 Grendel. And the question was why? And the answer was, well, it fits in an AR-15. So it's more ergonomical. It's a smaller system. The weight is lighter, which is a huge advantage when you're dealing with that kind of thing. And it almost performs as good as the 308 when you start looking at distances, right? You take a 6.5 Grendel and shoot out 500, 600, 700 yards and engage targets pretty well, and a lot more effectively than a 5.56. So we did some testing with Grendel versus 308. Unanimously, everybody wanted the Grendel for obvious reasons, from a shootability standpoint. And so then the question was brought up, well, knowing what we know now, this is a 10-plus-year-old cartridge, can we make it better? And so we said, well, yeah, I think if we go to 6mm, obvious ballistic benefits in doing that, right? Higher ballistic coefficient bullets, going a little bit faster. That's very helpful when you're, dealing with a combative situation where you don't know the exact range. There's some error involved in that. All of those things considered, 6mm on paper is a better option. So really at that point, what had to happen was, can we get the terminal performance of the 6mm projectiles to be as good or better than the 308 was? Because, you're hitting with a pretty big bullet there, and that's an advantage. And the net result of that was, yes, we were in what became the 6-ARC cartridge, and the projectiles developed around that cartridge. It will meet and in many cases exceed what a 308 will do in the same platform length. And so that's why you've now seen it. And that has, that design concept was specific for DoD. However, it has applicability in the civilian market as well. I just got done shooting a match with a 6-ARC. You can do that. It performs pretty well. You can hunt with it. It's a great low recoil, long barrel life cartridge, so you can train and compete and hunt with the same thing, and you're not worried about how many rounds are on my barrel. Is this thing going to die in the middle of this match because I'm approaching 800 or 1,000? That kind of stuff that we're used to worrying about in the match world. This is just a much more forgiving cartridge. Now, does it do what a Hot Rod 6 Creedmoor or some 6mm Wildcat will? No, not necessarily. But it's pretty dang good for a factory option.
It's interesting that it's pretty much the same trend that you've seen in PRS.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Everybody started with 308.
Like you said, you've gone out and kind of shot that kind of stuff, like unsupported off a barricade, and recoil is a massive part of that. And that's the same story in the military as well. There's the romantic old idea of a sniper spotter team that's sitting there prone with all the time in the world, but in reality, in the GWOT and the Global War on Terrorism, that was not normal. What was normal was having to take a quick snapshot at a couple hundred yards offhand, or off the hood of a vehicle, or off of a mud wall or whatever it may be. And recoil is a big part of that, because you're spotting your own shots and making your own corrections.
Yeah, and this is why I think competition is not to be ignored, right? Mm-hmm. Because, again, PRS, there's a reason why they started with 308s, because that's what they knew. And then they go, well, let's go to the 6.5. It's a better cartridge. Mm-hmm. They shot that for a while, and then they're like, yeah, but the 6mm can do what a 6.5 can do. I mean, all we're trying to do is ring that plate. Right? Less recoil, flatter. Mm-hmm. And now, 6mm dominate PRS, right? Which is pretty much the same path that you just described, right? Because you guys had a specific platform, right? Again, you had limitations, and how much can you do within these parameters?
Exactly.
And yeah, like you said, if you could carry a 25-pound AR-10, it's like, well, they're just 308 or even a 6.5 Creed or whatever, right? But in that M4 platform, that's a pretty big limitation. Barrel length, all of the above, right? Weight.
Absolutely.
When you say weight, you don't just mean the gun, also the ammo weight, right?
Absolutely.
Like carrying 500 pounds of 308 versus 500 pounds of 6-ARC, it's drastic difference.
Yeah, and that makes a huge difference when you start talking about the logistical supply chain of the military. So aircraft loadouts, all of the above is in some way limited by weight. And so if we can get the same performance at 30% less weight, that means we can have either 30% more ammunition, that has the same capability, or we can have the same amount of ammo and cut 30% of the weight for something else. It's a huge advantage.
Yeah, believe it or not, we also look at that in our sport, F-class shooters, because when we fly around, when we get on a plane, I think what do they have, like a 5 kilogram limit. So the point is, with the 284s, we could carry 180 rounds. You can pretty much shoot just about any match, 2-day match. Well, now that we moved up to the slightly bigger one, that came down to like 165 rounds.
Yeah.
Right. And now it's going to, oh man, I'm going to have to ship some ammo ahead of time. Right.
Yeah, that's a pain.
And the 300 WSM, that one just really just throws you out of the, you have to definitely ship ammo if you're going to fly. So we look at those things, and we have to make decisions based on that compromise. But it's very interesting to hear how not only to hear how you guys went about it, but also how closely it matches the precision rifle series.
Yeah, you see similar trends happening.
Yeah, pretty cool, man. So what else is new? Just anything you want to tell me you guys are working on? It can be top secret. It's okay. I won't tell no one.
Okay. You'll keep this one close to home. Yeah, we're always working on stuff, Eric. I mean, we're doing some pretty cool testing right now that I most certainly can't talk about. But it's really fun and really exciting, which to me is cool that I've been in this capacity for 11 years, and I will still wake up in the middle of the night excited about what's going to happen the next day. I think that's a good sign. And then, just we're still just trying to crank out as much stuff as we can. We've seen the firearms industry or market in general has really gone through a lot of changes over the past, say, decade. We've seen I think a lot of people that were probably kind of on the fence maybe about firearm ownership, not necessarily against it, but were never really had one. I think a lot of those people became firearm owners in those COVID riot years, presidential election, like all that craziness that was going on a couple of years ago. I think that pushed a lot of people into saying, hey, I think I'd like to own a firearm and train with it and be capable and stuff. And so we've seen a huge uptick in, demand over those years. Like you go to the store shelves and everything was empty for so long, So we're still just trying to push out as much stuff as we can to support everybody's needs. So it's a balance, it's a balance of, hey, looking at new stuff on one side and looking off at the horizon, but also got to make sure stuff's working today. Doing a lot of work right now with some new propellant design, which is always fun, because that's kind of a unique area, especially like on your side and most of your listeners, they just have what's available to them, whatever I can purchase, where we have the ability to tweak design of propellant and stuff like that. And so that's really cool and unique to be able to do that. So yeah, busy as can be, that's for sure.
What about primers? You guys gonna make primers?
I would hope so. Yeah.
It's just one of those things that I never in a lifetime would have guessed that primers would have been an issue at some point,
And the cost of them. I went to the store the other day and it was like, man, if the cost of stuff that it is now is the way it was when I got that 223 back on the farm and I was loading for it, that'd be tough, So I feel bad for the 12-year-olds me that are out there right now,
It's amazing how something so small at the time can literally dictate the path that you're going to go on for the rest of your life, right?
That's wild.
Like you said, had primers and components been what they are now, you may not be a ballistician. You may have been whatever else, you know what I mean?
I might be a ballistician for like Benjamin air guns or something.
But
probably
not
a rapper, Eric.
It's you never know. But it's just again for me, because I was ranching and coyotes were a problem. It's like we got to shoot them. Okay,
yeah, part of life.
And you know how smart they are. They got to the point where they'd see a truck and they just book it. But guess what? We just knew that the minute we left, they'd be back out there trying to hunt down those calves or some cows they're calving and the coyotes can just attack them there and just you know how that goes. I don't want to get too graphic, but we had to get rid of them, and they just kept getting farther and farther away from the truck. They see the truck and they book it, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna have to get smarter, right?
Yeah.
And that's just how. And now that I can shoot them really far, I don't even shoot them anymore.
I know.
I don't have to. I shoot paper. But yeah, very interesting, man. I do appreciate your time. I know you're real busy, so thank you again for doing this. Very interesting.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to come back on. I enjoyed our first conversation. I know a lot of people thought we just cat fought with each other the whole time. I didn't take it that way. It was awesome to get to meet you in person at SHOT Show too, so hopefully get to see you in person again sometime soon.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I looked at it more like two friends just arguing.
Yeah,
I don't know if arguing is the
sorting
correct
through
word.
some
Just
stuff, you know?
pushing back. Like, really? Like, I do that with my friends all the time. Like,
Yeah.
and you can probably imagine, even competition shooters, you put them all in the same house, you give them a little bit of group tightener, and they start to argue about the most minute things, you know. And it's always fun, the level of discussions, I'm going to call them discussions, that we have versus a discussion that somebody would have at the range, you know, just someone at a public range.
Yeah.
You know, they're typically talking about, I don't know, scopes or whatever, and we're talking about engagement in the lands and clearance in the neck and how much better, you know, whatever. It's fun.
Yeah, if all of our conversations were benign and we had nothing to scrap over, we'd just get bored and go find something to do that with, you know. So, yeah, I'm glad we can do it within the things that we're passionate about.
Yes, sir. All right, man, I appreciate it. Don't be a stranger. Come back soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Eric. See ya.
Later. Bye-bye.